I would probably identify the most in recent time. I would probably identify the most recent U.S. election as the turning point for this, and I'm saying that as an American citizen. This is my first time living in Canada. I've noticed that public discourse has taken to elevate fascism as the ultimate evil, and maybe rightfully so. You know, there were many horrific things committed by fascist states in the 20th century. And you see people, you know, like Facebook cover photos, like bash the fash. You see stickers on laptops, this machine kills fascists. It is, you know, there's this big, like, backlash against fascism and the horrors that it caused. But in spite of that, you don't see the same reaction to the horrors and the genocide that were caused by socialist and communist states in the 20th century. You do not... You see people who virtue signal endlessly about how horrible the Holocaust was, about how awful these things were, and then just hand wave away the famine genocide of the Ukraine, the Great Leap Forward. They think these things are inconsequential or even necessary sacrifices for the rise of the greater good of socialism or communism. And I personally find that morally reprehensible, and I can't understand where that comes in, how you can stand there and be so opposed to this genocide, but say that this genocide is somehow just, oh, it's not a problem. And why do you think that, how do you think that disconnect happens? How do you think people can convince themselves of that? And why do you think that happens?
It's a great question. You know, my house is covered with art from the Soviet era. And I have a lot of reasons for that. Part of it is to remind me of what happened. Part of it is to watch the struggle between the art and the propaganda on the canvases sort of in real time. You know, I'm very interested in that. But I would never decorate my house with Nazi regalia, you know? And you think, well, why is that exactly? It's not like I don't know that what happened in the communist regimes was utterly reprehensible. Why is it? And perhaps it's not acceptable to have, you know, socialist, realist paintings in your house. But it's certainly more acceptable, or it seems that way, than to have paintings from the Nazi era, let's say. So then you think, well, why is that exactly? And I think, you know, back in 1918, at the dawn of the Russian Revolution, when Europe was in flames and in ruins and the monarchical societies were collapsing and the Industrial Revolution was in full force and there was terrible poverty and terrible inequality, the dream of universal brotherhood was a compelling dream, the dream of egalitarianism. And maybe, who knows how much of it was motivated by genuine benevolence? Some, at least. It's very difficult to see that the Nazi phenomena was ever generated by any genuine benevolence. That's very difficult to make a case for. So maybe you can forgive the communist utopians 100 years ago because they didn't know what they were getting in for. People had warned them. Dostoevsky warned them. Nietzsche warned them. But still. And then the other thing, too, is the problem of inequality. It's like the problem of inequality is a real problem, and it doesn't go away. Like, it's very difficult when you walk down Bloor Street, for example, in Toronto, and you see homeless people, alcoholics and drug addicts who are struggling, and the mentally ill who are on the street, and they're in their little domain of hell. It's really difficult for that to not tear at your heartstrings and say, well, isn't the world an unjust place or an unfair place, which it is. And so you can see the never-ending wellsprings of motivation to support the oppressed. And I think the fact that the communist dogma at least had that as part of its initiating ethos is partly what seems to make it forgivable. I also think it's easier for people to identify why fascism is wrong. We can say, look, racial superiority, no. Okay, it's pretty simple, right? It's 3 words. You can really get it. But equality of outcome? It's like, that's really wrong. It's really wrong. But it's not so obvious why, right? It isn't, you can't just say equality of outcome, no, and have everyone clap. Because it isn't as, well, and that's the thing. It's really difficult to isolate the pathological elements in radical left-wing thought. Because they're not self-evidently pathological. Like, there's this old cliche, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. It's like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. We have needs. It's like, let's have them fulfilled. And, well, you have an ability. Well, like, manifest it. It's like, Well, it doesn't work in practice. In fact, it's murderous in practice. And it's a great catastrophe in some sense that it's murderous in practice. So I just think maybe part of it is it's just a hell of a lot harder to learn why it's wrong. That combined with, the genuine outpouring of compassion for the oppressed, and which is like, who's for poverty? No one, right? And inequality is a painful reality. It's painful for everyone.